Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Just a few days ago, the Treasurer stood on the other side of the House and declared that whether you live in Brisbane or Blackall, this is a budget for all of Queensland. How wrong we were. Mr Deputy Speaker, this budget is predominantly a budget for Brisbane and does absolutely nothing to support the hard-working Queenslanders in the electorate of Gregory. It's a complete and utter failure for rural Queensland. It was billed as a big win for Queensland, but it turns out the Treasurer then went on to say there was grand infrastructure spend in regional Queensland and touted 65% infrastructure funds being spent outside the greater Brisbane area. Mr Speaker, a casual glance of the budget papers showed worrying signs, and further investigation proved that the Treasurer comments were at least misleading to the hard-working people of Gregory, especially those that toil away and produce the wealth that the Treasurer has squandered in her seat in South Brisbane. The simple fact is, in the electorate of Gregory, there is no additional funding for new or upgrade schools. There is no real new funding for new road projects. For an electorate that covers more than 450,000 square kilometres, there is just $2.9 million for hospital upgrades. Central Highlands and the Central West hospitals and health services will see no additional services and no renal dialysis chairs for any communities in the electorate of Gregory. And to make matters worse, my constituents will be slugged with 5 new taxes, higher electricity prices, higher water bills and more red and green tape for their small business and agricultural enterprises. Mr Deputy Speaker, education is paramount for a growing state. A quality education allows young people the opportunity to grow into whoever they desire. Regardless of their circumstances, a quality education ensures that we get the best out of our state's young people. But sadly, this budget ignores the Central Highlands and the Central West students completely. The budget delivers $668.4 million for new capital spend for schools throughout Queensland. But disappointingly, there's not much going to schools in the electorate of Gregory. Mr Deputy Speaker, not one of my 58 state schools is receiving any additional funding out of the budget papers for new classrooms or updated facilities. This is in comparison to more than $195 million being spent on schools in Brisbane. Mr Deputy Speaker, it beggars belief that the Treasurer can stand up on Tuesday and claim at the heart of any Labor budget is education and go on to deliver a budget that does nothing to support rural Queensland students and doesn't for the Central Highlands or Central West schools. But it's just not rural Queenslanders who are being failed by the government. Mr Deputy Speaker, our schools statewide failed to meet the national minimum standards for Year 3, Year 5, Year 7, Year 9 in 2017. This government has failed Queensland students by not supporting schools to grow and be their best they can be, by not developing better facilities and by failing to improve education standards. Mr Deputy Speaker, in the electorate of Gregory, it's crying out for better health services. Throughout Queensland, our hospitals and health services are at breaking point. The Category 1, 2 and 3 emergency patients are not being seen within recommended clinical timeframes and with ambulance ramping up to a whopping 22% of Queensland being stuck in hospitals' waiting bays for more than 30 minutes. These Queenslanders aren't going to hospital with a sore toe or a sniffle. They are presenting at our emergency departments with immediate or potentially life-threatening injuries. The government has failed to keep Queenslanders safe and healthy. But this budget has not just failed Queenslanders needing to use their local hospital emergency departments, it has totally failed people in the electorate of Gregory. Rural Queensland is crying out for better health. Sadly, the budget handed down by the Treasurer only a few days ago, there is no new money for services for the Central Highlands and Central West. Mr Speaker, we have serious issues in the electorate in regards to renal dialysis services throughout the Central Highlands and Central West. Currently, there are no renal dialysis chairs in the region. This is impacting constituents dramatically, with one of my constituents travelling back and forth from Emerald to Rockhampton 3 times a week, every week, to receive dialysis treatments. I've also talked to a number of constituents who have left their families and friends in Longreach and have moved to Townsville just so they can receive that treatment as well. I've made representation to the Health Minister in regards to this service, but clearly these pleas have fallen on deaf ears. It's devastating this budget provides no additional services to my constituents. It's not only services that have been forgotten by this budget for Brisbane, but, Mr Speaker, the biggest health failure is in the budget is the infrastructure. The great big health investment in the electorate of Gregory was the announcement of the redevelopment of the Blackall Hospital. And I welcome that, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Minister for putting that in the budget papers. But there's a small issue with that announcement in the budget. Mr Deputy Speaker, the budget only delivers $1 million for this project, but the actual project costs $17 million for the development. Mr Speaker, where is the other $16 million and when is it going to be committed to the Blackall Hospital? Mr Speaker, this is an utter failure for the community of Blackall. But what's more shocking is that $1 million committed to the Blackall Hospital is the only new health investment in the Central Highlands and Central West region. It's obvious that this budget is a budget for Brisbane and will do nothing for rural Queenslanders. Mr Deputy Speaker, it was clear before Tuesday that the Labor Party has turned its back on Queensland's agricultural sector. But this budget proves it. There is no extra funding for Queensland farmers and graziers and only more red tape, regulation and green tape. Mr Deputy Speaker, there's nothing in this budget that assists the farmers and graziers who, putting it bluntly, have been thrown under the bus by the government with the recent vegetation management changes. Farmers and graziers throughout regional Queensland have lost hundreds of millions of dollars off the value of their agricultural properties and have had thousands of hectares locked up and seen this city-centric Labor government declare our great state closed for business when it comes to building new high-value agricultural projects in Queensland. The only money that we've seen that will help farmers and graziers who are battling this unfair vegetation management changes is $4 million allocated to improving the statewide land cover and tree study. Any farmer and grazier and agricultural scientist will tell you that the SLATS report is extremely inaccurate, and now the government is locking up more and more land. It's critical that this report, well-funded and accurate, $4 million is really a measly pittance that won't go nearly as far enough to build an accurate report into statewide land cover, and it shows once and for all the government holds farmers and graziers in total disregard and won't back them at all. Even worse, Mr Speaker, the announcement snuck deep into the budget papers of funding for cluster fencing being halved to $5 million over 2 years. Wild dogs, as we all know, have decimated this once booming sheep and wool industry in Western Queensland, and the drought was just another kick in the guts. Cluster fencing is working, and it is working well. This is a game changer for graziers who've seen lambing rates climb from 20% to 90% at a time, with wool prices at 1,500 cents a kilogram clean. It's helping restore confidence in the region and bringing people back to towns like Longreach, Blackall, Yarraka, Isiswood, Barcaldine and Muttaburra. Mr Deputy Speaker, these regions are struggling with the devastation of drought, which never seems to give. And to make matters worse, they have stuck with the state government, who are pushing them to the brink with red and green tape. And now they have halved the funding for cluster fencing. This is just appalling, absolutely appalling, especially at a time when we should be increasing funding for cluster fencing to secure more and more pastoral land. And, Mr Deputy Speaker, Labor's disappointing budget for Brisbane doesn't just stop at demonising the agricultural sector, it fails to deliver adequate water infrastructure for Queensland. While it is pleasing to see that the government has finally delivered funds to build Rookwood Weir, after 871 days since the federal government announced the project, the state government has failed to take advantage to the $3 billion in federal funding for water infrastructure. That's a failure to invest in Durana Dam, Nalinga Dam, the Burdekin Falls Dam, and a failure to duplicate the Ross River Dam pipeline. Mr Deputy Speaker, I state the above water projects because they are what the LNP went to the 2017 election with. We are committed to delivering water infrastructure projects that are vital for regional Queensland and that we take full advantage of the $3 billion on offer from the federal government. This budget for Brisbane's biggest blunder is the debt bomb that we are handing over to our children and to our grandchildren, and extra taxes that we are slugging on hard-working Queenslanders. That's $2.25 billion in new taxes and fees over the next 4 years for every single Queenslander. Car stamp duty is being increased, property investors are being taxed, land tax is increasing, and there's the new tax on betting and, of course, Mr Deputy Speaker, the famous waste tax. Mr Deputy Speaker, the waste tax, which the Treasurer claims won't cost residents anything, is budgeted to bring in a whopping $1.32 billion. And now the Treasurer tries to cover this up by saying that it's not a tax on Queenslanders. The Treasurer doesn't seem to understand that if you tax Queenslanders, whether it be directly through imposts on local councils or by taxing waste, you rip dollars out of their pockets, meaning less money to be spent in their local communities. And even with 5 new taxes, Mr Speaker, Queensland debt has ballooned to $83 billion. That's $3.7 billion in interest alone for every year, $71 million a week and $10 million a day. Just think how much we can invest in regional Queensland on roads and hospitals if we weren't paying the debt back. But there are winners in this budget, Mr Deputy Speaker. Yes, there are. It's the constituents of South Brisbane, Mr Speaker, and they're the big winners. This budget provides $776 million for Cross River Rail Delivery Authority. This is a project that has been knocked back by Infrastructure Australia, knocked back because the government's business case projected growth that's 7 times faster than the actual growth that was found, more than 20 instances of unsubstantiated opinions, assertions and errors, and it doesn't even meet the basic cost-benefit ratios, with costs of the project likely to exceed the benefits. Mr Deputy Speaker, there's more. There's $17.3 million for a 3-metre wide bike track, the V1 Veloway, with a total project cost of $45 million. Just for a comparison, we could seal the remaining section of the Jericho-Blackall Road and upgrade the Bohenia Downs to Doringa Road. We could also continue to seal the Longreach to Munnabara Road and continue to seal the Tambo Springshaw Road, all weather access to more communities in the electorate of Gregory for vastly less than this cycleway. But I suppose that's the benefit of being the Treasurer. You can spend big in your own electorate and throw rural Queensland to the curbside. Mr Deputy Speaker, the Treasurer has handed down a budget purely for Brisbane. The Treasurer has failed on delivering for the constituents of Gregory. The Treasurer has failed on delivering for better schools, better hospitals, better roads and for a better state. She should be ashamed of her budget for Brisbane. That's utterly failed rural Queensland. And just before I finish up, I would like to speak on as Shadow Minister for Fire and Emergency Services and Volunteers. Mr Speaker, it is good to see that the state government is finally supporting our local fire and emergency services, and I commend the Minister on his commitment for that, with over $82 million invested in facilities, fire appliances, communication and equipment. Finally, regional Queensland is seeing an investment in fire and emergency services, including Esk, Childers and Richmond. Of course, the member for Glasshouse would be happy to see money for the new emergency services facility at Maloney as well. And I think that is wise money spending on what we see as our first responders who do a fantastic job. And as we go into the winter months and the feed dries off, of course, one of our biggest issues is bushfires, and we need to have our first responders in the fire and emergency services equipped with the right equipment to make sure that they can continue to provide an absolute excellent service that they do. And I do welcome that. But I also asked the Minister, and I have spoken to the Minister about that, we desperately need a new fire station in Longreach. I know that the state government does own the land, and I know there are some preliminary discussions on that, and I think what we need to do is make sure that we get that project into next year's budget, so the people of Longreach who are dedicated to the fire service make sure that they have a home and a facility which is a facility that we need for today. Of course, you've only got to look at the Emerald fire station on Andrews Road, and it's an excellent facility, and I think we need a similar facility like that in the Longreach area. And of course, we need to continue working with the Alpha Fire Brigade and making sure that they have the right equipment and access. We do have a new fire station there. We just need to make sure that they have the right training facilities so they can continue to train. Because what we've got to remember, a lot of these bush firefighters are volunteers. And they do it because they're dedicated to their service. They have full-time jobs themselves, and they do an excellent job, and there's nothing better than going around and catching up with the dedication they have. And of course our rural firefighters need to be continue to be supported, and of course the SES, and of course every volunteer in Queensland. We have a massive amount of people volunteering in our state. What we need to do as a government, we need to make sure that they have the support, and I certainly welcome the additional funding that the Minister for Fire and Emergency Services has given to our fire and emergency services in this year's budget. Thank you.